Hi, my name is Wesley Schultz. I'm the Associate Conductor of the North Carolina Symphony. I'm happy to be back with you for another edition of Behind the Music. Today, we'll be looking at the life and music of Russian composer Sergei Rachmaninoff, who was born in Russia in 1873 and died a United States citizen in Beverly Hills in 1943. The Symphony is looking forward to sharing our next program featuring guest artists Zul Bailey, cello, and Natasha Premsky, piano, performing Rachmaninoff's music on Friday, December 11th at noon. Today, as we look behind the music, we're going to examine Rachmaninoff's earliest years as a pianist and composer that led to a startlingly mature student work, his trio, Elegiac in G minor. Following this, we'll take a look at a difficult time in Rachmaninoff's life that, thankfully, resolved in a way that gifted us with an outstanding contribution to the cello repertory, his cello sonata. Sergei Rachmaninoff was, what you could say, a very Russian composer, yet his music did not necessarily resonate with the music of other Russian composers, such as Rimsky-Korsakov, or Modest Mussorgsky, or Alexander Borodin. Sergei Rachmaninoff sounded first and foremost like himself. He rarely quoted folk songs, but he used rhythm, often a core component of folk melodies, as a driving force in his music. He also constructed soaring, highly lyrical melodies that sound as if they are being written as they are being heard. He wasn't particularly innovative, yet his use of chromaticism is unique and distinct from other composers such as Richard Wagner and his contemporary and fellow student Alexander Scriabin. Early in his life, Rachmaninoff was personally and emotionally affected by upheaval and disorder. As a result, his music is almost invariably marked by episodes of melancholy. Rachmaninoff's father, though musical, was unstable and squandered the family's finances before abandoning the family entirely. This left Rachmaninoff's mother poor and alone to raise 6 children. During an epidemic of diphtheria, Rachmaninoff's sister, Sophia, died. Later on, another sister, one with a beautiful contralto voice, would die suddenly of pernicious anemia, an autoimmune disorder. With his now single mother pulled in so many directions, Rachmaninoff struggled with his emotions as a youth, and he failed all of his general subjects when he was a 12-year-old studying at the St. Petersburg Conservatory. Subsequently, he was sent to the Moscow Conservatory to study with the strict disciplinarian Nikolai Zverev. Rachmaninoff lived in close quarters with other Zverev students, and together they blossomed as young musicians. They learned the symphonic and chamber repertory by playing piano duets, and Zverev opened his home on Sundays to the musical and intellectuals of Moscow, including Tchaikovsky, Arensky, Anton Rubinstein, and others. All of this had an influence on Rachmaninoff, both as a pianist and future composer. Speaking of influences, Rachmaninoff's grandmother doted on him back when he lived in St. Petersburg, and the two of them would go around visiting his favorite churches and cathedrals. Though not really religious, Rachmaninoff loved the ceremonies and the music that he heard. When he would return home, he would play the chants he heard on the piano, note perfect. The stepwise motion of these chants were a huge influence in how Rachmaninoff crafted his own melodies. In fact, he often quoted Russian Orthodox music in his works. The Dies Irae from the Mass of the Dead appears so frequently in his music that one can picture Rachmaninoff with his head twisted, looking behind him as if fate is on his heels. Last, the ringing of church bells, very characteristic of Russia, also permeates much of his music. And so we can now talk about the first of 2 pieces by Rachmaninoff that are on this weekend's program. His trio Elegiac in G minor, composed in about 1891 when he was 17 and 18 years old. The title is from 16th century French via Latin or Greek and means characteristic of an elegy, haunting in character. As I mentioned earlier, Rachmaninoff was studying at the Moscow Conservatory as a teenager with his teacher Zverev. Zverev wanted Rachmaninoff to be a pianist only, but Rachmaninoff was feeling pulled more and more to composition. They eventually had a falling out, and Rachmaninoff switched teachers. Between 1887 and 1891, when he wrote Trio Elegiac, these were essentially his first years attempting to compose. Put another way, the trio is in fact a student work. He hadn't published anything yet, and why would he? What he was writing was still mostly on assignment from his teachers or works assigned as final projects. Yet here we are in 2020 performing essentially a homework assignment. But we're performing it because it was good enough, even then, to show us the might of Rachmaninoff's talent. The trio is written for piano trio, cello, violin, and piano. It was premiered at a concert with two friends as a part of a program that featured some of Rachmaninoff's music as well as music by other composers. The piece is in one movement and follows traditional sonata form. Where we can tell it is a work by a composer in training is in how dominant a role the piano plays. The piece is 12 minutes long, but the first minute is dominated by the piano. When the violin and cello emerge, they each take a turn at the melody the piano has already given. Whereas the piano line is virtuosic, the cello and violin simply deliver the melody more or less unadorned. But even if there is a difference in how the piano is treated compared to the strings, we do learn about an aspect of Rachmaninoff in this work that will be with him throughout his life. He is a composer who gives us endless, heartfelt, and highly expressive melodies. In his future works, like his Piano Concerto No. 2 and his Second Symphony, he crafts melodies that spin and spin as if they had no beginning and no end. It's as if they had always existed. In this trio, we get a sense of that in the directness of expression in the melodies. One other aspect to think about as you listen to the performance. In listening to the work, you might hear the influence of Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky was in fact a teacher at the Moscow Conservatory and gave high marks to Rachmaninoff, telling others that Rachmaninoff was a composer to watch. Interestingly, a year after the G minor Trio Elegiac was composed, Tchaikovsky died. In response, Rachmaninoff composed a second Trio Elegiac, this time in D minor and substantially longer. It too is moody and depressed and is clearly an emotional response from Rachmaninoff over Tchaikovsky's untimely death. So there we have it, the G minor Trio Elegiac, a work composed during Rachmaninoff's last couple of years as a student. As the capstone piece for his conservatory studies, Rachmaninoff wrote a one-act opera called Aleka that propelled him on his professional career as a composer. After graduation, he composed various works in genres such as song, choruses, works for solo piano, and chamber groups. He also started composing purely orchestral works, and by 1895 had completed his Symphony No. 1. It was premiered 2 years later, but it was a total disaster. The conductor, Glazunov, himself a composer, rehearsed and conducted poorly. Some reports say he was drunk at the performance. There were mistakes in the parts, and the musicians were lifeless as well as ill-equipped for the performance, and as a result, the critics pounced, damning both the performance and the symphony. This dismal outing as a symphonist had a profound effect on Rachmaninoff. After the performance, he essentially fled Moscow without even bothering to collect the orchestral parts from the music stands. The manuscript to the symphony is lost. We don't know if Rachmaninoff destroyed it or if it's simply misplaced. Regardless, the symphony was never performed again in his lifetime. For nearly 3 years, Rachmaninoff stopped composing. He did take up conducting for the first time, and he appeared in recital as a pianist, but only a few trifles came out of his composition pen. The failure of the First Symphony weighed heavily on him and his self-esteem. It took meeting a hypnotherapist, a Dr. Nikolai Dahl, daily from January to April 1900 for Rachmaninoff to regain his confidence and return to composing. With the encouragement from Dr. Dahl, Rachmaninoff eventually penned his second piano concerto. It was a smashing success and reignited his desire to compose. At the same time he wrote the second piano concerto, He also sketched a second suite for 2 pianos and his cello sonata. On this weekend's performance, we have the great privilege of hearing Zul Bailey and Natasha Premsky perform this magnificent chamber work. Rachmaninoff only composed a handful of instrumental chamber works, but what he did write, he often had the voice of the cello in mind. The cello sonata was the last piece of chamber music he wrote, even though he was only 28, and it's arguably his finest. So though Rachmaninoff seemed to have an affinity for the cello, the piano still plays a dominant role in the sonata, just as it did in the trio Elegiac. It's said that Rachmaninoff didn't like the title cello sonata, but instead would have preferred sonata for piano and cello. Regardless of the title, it's great music. The work is in 4 movements and lasts about 35 minutes. The first movement opens softly with fragments of ponderous melodic bits. The path forward seems uncertain, yet also curious. In the main section of the work, the cello gets the primary melody, while the piano takes a second, slower theme. As a whole, the movement is brawny and powerful and culminates in a breathless conclusion. The second movement, Allegro scherzando, quivers with restless but driving triplets in the piano that continually propel the music forward, while the cello offers fragmentary comments. The trio theme of this movement is pure Rachmaninoff, with its songful, endless melody construction. The third movement, Andante, is another beautiful song, in which the piano first offers the melody before being picked up by the cello and then developed together. The finale, marked Allegro mosso, also features a driving triplet rhythm, as in prior movements, that keeps the music marching forward. One of my favorite features of this movement is the second theme, delivered by the cello at a slower, more deliberate tempo, and is set not in a soaring soprano voice up on the fingerboard, but is instead set in the baritone register. This gives the theme body and depth, as well as displays the stunning middle register of the cello. A coda in the final moments of the sonata propel the music to a thrilling conclusion. Thank you for tuning in for this examination of 2 of Rachmaninoff's extraordinary chamber works. I certainly hope you'll join us for the North Carolina Symphony's presentation of guest artist Zul Bailey, cello, and Natasha Premsky, piano, along with our very own Karen Strittmatter-Galvin, violin. The concert streams on Friday, December 11th at noon and will be available for 20 days following. Thank you for your support of the North Carolina Symphony. I'll see you at the performance.